for the Utah Title I Directors Meeting, you are in the right place. If you're rubbing your eyes saying to yourself, hey, he doesn't look like Becky Donaldson, you're right. After a 40-year illustrious career, Dr. Donaldson retired at the end of December. My name is Max Lang, and I took over that position for Becky. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I've worked here at USBE for a number of years and with a number of programs, most recently with School Improvement. And now I'm back with Elementary Secondary Education Act and related state initiatives, as well as the ESSER Funds. So let me quickly introduce our team and friends here, and you may see them there. If I haven't met you before, by the way, before I start, I look forward to meeting you. I think I probably know a lot of you just through working here in the agency. And as you see these names here, just the members of my team, I'll quickly introduce them. Who runs it all, Becky Peters. Our director of the Utah Center for Continuous School Improvement, Tracy Vandeventer. Title I School Improvement and State School Turnaround, Leslie Evans. Migrant Education and McKinney-Vento Homeless, Jeff Ojeda. One of our fiscal managers, compliance managers, Marilee Wendell. Title I Monitoring and Support, Val Murdoch. Fiscal manager, compliance manager, Tammy Long. Dr. Christelle Estrada, Title III English Learners, Immigrants, Refugees. Camille Sheik, Title IV-B, 21st Century Community Learning Centers. Robert Palmer, Intergenerational Poverty and Partnerships with Student Success. Dr. Chuck Foster, Title VI, American Indian Education. Jessica Callan, Parent, Family, Community Engagement. Renee Medina, another one of our specialists here that runs it all. And our CARES team, Jessica Care and Sarah Harward. Is there anybody that I missed here? Okay. Let me share my screen again and we'll quickly run through the agenda today. We have a lot of things on the docket today, and I want to walk through those. So I know we've received a lot of phone calls about the preliminary Title I budget. So we're going to start right off the bang with that. Talking again about some Title I guidance, about Title I eligibility, rank and serve, equitable services for private schools. Dr. Estrada is going to give us some updates on Title III. Val will lead us through the annual evaluation of parent engagement. We'll take a comfort break right just before 10, right around 10. Leslie Evans is going to share with us some of the big school improvement updates that have recently happened. Tracy will share school call survey updates, and then Camille Sheik will talk about after school summer program supports and resources. There's an announcement about ESSER reporting that Sarah Harward will end off. Then we're going to wrap up there just before noon, and then most of our team, those who are available, will hang out for some office hours to answer any questions you may have about ESSER, GEAR, EANS funds, anything related to Title I, anything related to any of those other programs for those who are available. Now, at the very end of this PowerPoint presentation is everybody's contact information. So if you hear something and you have a question that's specific to you, that you may want to contact the person who can share that information with you, their contact will be at the end. Like I said, the agenda is pretty full today. So I just fair warning, there's a lot of information that we're going to be sharing. So hold on, here we go. So I think the main reason receiving so many phone calls about preliminary allocations is because this year marks the decennial Census Bureau count. And so that everybody receives, that survey in the country, every household. So we get a little bit more accurate count of population, and that impacts our low income student count. So if you've heard a rumor or you've hearing rumors that Utah has received a decrease in funds, that is correct. And before I show you this next slide, we're going to walk through maybe some of those reasons why. Let me just give you this disclaimer. I was an English major in school and an English teacher. There is a lot of statistical analysis in these calculations for this stuff. So I've spent a lot of time over the past week or so talking with the Department of Ed, emailing back and forth to try to get an understanding of how our Title I allocation, the preliminary allocation, has been impacted. And this is what it looks like. So last year, 21-22 school year, we received just under $87 million. This year, the preliminary allocation is $74 million. That's a $13 million increase in funds overall. So even though the feds approved a $1 billion increase to the overall Title I allocation for the country, Utah will be experiencing a decrease. And I'm going to walk through some of the reasons why that may be, just some of the Census Bureau data and the Department of Education calculation for student counts that impact Title I. And I also, if there are those of you who spend a lot of time researching Census Bureau data or understand this more completely than I do, please speak up, provide clarification or corrections where my understanding of this is incorrect. So this is how the statute for the Elementary Secondary Education Act requires that students are counted for Title I purposes. What they do, they don't count students in a state, they count district boundary students. So Utah receives 41 distinct student counts, and then they're aggregated together for the state. This is the number of students ages 5 through 17 in a school district from the local education agency, our 41, families below the poverty level. Does anybody know what the poverty level is? Because I didn't until I researched this out. The poverty level is an income for a family of 4, and it is rated depending on the number of students at $27,479 per year. So the way the students are counted, they count the number of students under that, which are impacted by a whole bunch of different agency counts, which we'll get to, and the number of students ages 5 through 17 who are above that count. And then they aggregate them for each school district. That aggregated together becomes the state count. So in December, we received the Department of Education's Census Bureau data estimates. So like I said, 2020 marked the first time since 2010 that we did the decennial census population estimate counts. Every household received the survey. Every student was supposedly, every family was supposedly counted. We also did this, or the feds did this American Community Survey. Our compliance managers, Tammy and Marilee, actually called the Census Bureau to ask, why there was such a reduction in our counts. And they said one of the reasons was that our American Community Survey responses were really low. Department of Agriculture, free and reduced, federal income tax returns, SNAP, IRS data, and data from the Bureau of Economic Analysis. So in sum, what this says is the Census Bureau estimates what they give, or what the Department of Education uses for these district counts in the states, is a whole bunch of different counts from different agencies. And they take this and extrapolate what they can, and they make an estimate. So we received that estimate in December with a number of months to challenge those results. So March 16 ended the time for that challenge period. There are only 2 reasons why a state can challenge those estimates. The biggest one is the change in school district boundaries. So if we add a new school, if we add a new district, if we add a new district and that changes district boundaries, that's the principal reason why we would be
And Max, you're out.
Max, you're frozen. Your screen is frozen.
There he is.
I hear I was muted, even though I didn't tell me I was muted. Regardless, if you can hear me, we did not challenge the Census Bureau's estimates. There are 2 links, and you will receive all of these slides following this meeting with these links in here. You can actually contact the Census Bureau and ask them questions specific to your region, your district, your area, and they can provide any kind of further detail. So this is the difference. In 2019, the count of students 5 through 17 who were under that low income threshold, 58,000 and change, the poverty rate was 8.6 roughly, and that was our national percentage, 0.69 of the total poverty population. In 2020, you'll see that substantial drop. So we start to wonder, well, why was that decrease? Why was there that decrease in number? Keeping in mind, we're coming through a pandemic. Utah fared a lot better than a lot of other states. Also keep in mind that the results are an aggregate of your specific district, your area where your local education agency lies. So you fared a little better, a lot better, or the same as every other district in the country comparably. So where Utah's economy has fared better through the pandemic, where there are data collection issues and the Census Bureau may have impacted that. And we have, for the first time in a number of years, the increase in population in Utah is due to out-of-state move-ins. When people move from other states into Utah, generally, and the largest state was California, people come in with a little bit more money. These are all guesstimations. I had this conversation with our program analyst, Todd Stevenson from the Department of Education, and he concurred that those are generally reasons why populations or poverty rates increase or decrease in a state. Let me tell you, this is something that I was unfamiliar with, and I learned this. States receive Title I allocations based by district area. So each district receives, independent from the other districts in the state, 4 statutory funds through 4 different statutory formulas. And I'm going to walk through each of these briefly. The basic grants, concentration grants, targeted grants, education finance incentive grants, or the Efig. A district can receive all of these grants, some of these grants, or none of these grants, because each of them have threshold eligibility criteria involved. The first one is the basic grant. So this is based on 2020 Census Bureau data and all those population estimates from, and inclusive of all those other federal departments and the data that's collected there. Estimates of below poverty income from students ages 5 through 17, and they also include some per pupil expenditure data from 2019. A district must have 10 students, and the number of these students, or the number of the students, exceeds 2% of the district's total population of those students. There is a hold harmless. It's dependent on your preceding year, what was allocated, an 85, 90, or 95% hold harmless. So it is possible that LEAs in a state do not receive the basic grant. If they do receive the basic grant and it is less than what they received the year before, there is a hold harmless. The next one is a concentration grant. So it's all those LEAs who meet the basic grant eligibility criteria, that 2%, they have those students there, but the number of those students exceeds 6,500 students in that district, in that LEA, or 15% of that student population. There is a hold harmless here, so if you meet it 1 year, that 15%, there's a hold harmless for 4 consecutive years after that. those LEAs that receive or qualify for a concentration grant also are eligible to receive targeted grants. Those LEAs that receive targeted grants do not necessarily receive concentration grants. So the eligibility for a targeted grant is you meet the basic grant eligibility criteria, but it's a 5% population there. So if your students ages 5 through 17 who reach that poverty level or under that threshold exceeds 5% of your student population, then you qualify for the targeted grant. So there is a hold harmless, but only if you qualify in the first place. So if you exceed that 5%, you qualify for the targeted grant. There were 4 LEAs this year who previously received the targeted grant last year who did not meet that threshold to qualify for the eligibility criteria grant this year. The next one is one of my favorites here, the Education Finance Incentive Grant, or the EFIG. And I'm going to just read some of this criteria. So first of all, to qualify or be eligible to receive the EFIG grant, you must have also qualified for the targeted grant at that 5% threshold of those students. And the EFIG grant is based on 2 factors: a state's effort to provide financial support for education compared to its relative wealth, as determined, measured by per capita income, and an equity factor measuring the degree to which education expenditures vary among LEAs. The EFIG, so overall, LEAs will receive, they're benefited in states that spend more money on education relative to their wealth. Well, as you know, we've all heard, Utah is not usually on the top of the list for this particular factor. It's a weighted formula. And there is a hold harmless if they qualify. If an LEA qualifies for the EFIG grant initially, then there is a hold harmless should the amount have decreased from the year before. Again, we had the same 4 LEAs who did not meet the eligibility criteria for the EFIG grant. So there were 4 districts who last year qualified for targeted grant and the EFIG grant that did not qualify this year for both of those. Those 4 districts account for $7 million of that $13 million loss in funds for the state. So that's kind of where we are there. Moving forward, I think I had said we are still working through the LEA preliminary allocations. So there are a couple of considerations that we're still determining. We just got the state preliminary allocation for Title I last week, and we're preparing to be, for accuracy, the LEA Title I allocations now. And I spoke with Tammy Long yesterday, and she's pretty close. There are a couple of things that we're still looking through for accuracy to make sure that it's correct when we send it out. I know that last year in some of the formula calculations, there was an error. So we're working this year to be very careful that that error is not again, doesn't happen again. A couple things that must come off the top before those are figured: school improvement, direct services, state administration, and then the configuration through those 4 statutory formula grants for charter schools. As soon as we're done, and we're hoping this is going to be next week at the latest, we'll be able to email you those preliminary allocations. We'll also post them on the USBE website. The final allocations are determined in July 1. A big chunk of money comes from the feds in July 1 for Title I, and then another chunk comes out in October. But we will have the preliminary allocations hopefully somewhere around, in next week, in the few days into next week. Before I move on with education updates, does anybody have any comments or questions? And yeah, we do know who those 4 districts are. There was a question in there, and it's public information, so I think we can share with you Jordan District, Canyons District, Davis, and Park City. Were those that did not meet the eligibility criteria this year for the targeted grant and the EFIG grant.
So Max, I have a question. So we individually cannot challenge,
So in December, when the Department of Education sent out those preliminary Census Bureau estimates, we had a period of time to challenge that from December 16th to March 16th. So upon review, we didn't have a change in district boundaries in the state. So we weren't able to then again look at the way the models, the statistical models were calculated. One kind of sets up the other one. If we have a change in district boundaries in the state, a new district or a district is combined with another district or something like that, then we can challenge it. We didn't, so we can't really challenge the statistical models. But you can call Dr. VR and ask the Census Bureau, and I put that contact information on there. Great question. Any other questions, comments? Anybody who's an expert on Census Bureau data that would like to speak up and clarify or correct anything that I shared here? Okay, we'll move on. If you attended the national conference in New Orleans, or you were watching the conference in New Orleans, you may have seen some presentations that were conducted there. If I can get my PowerPoint to change slides here. About some data guidance updated for 2022 from the Department of Education. And one of those big guidance flexibilities that were given, or alternative mechanisms for adjusting your student poverty count or the percentages for rank and serve, were to accommodate for that lack of free and reduced price lunch, the FRPL data from 2020 and 2021 and 21-22, because we were working under a waiver. So a lot of us didn't collect that data, or the data we did collect was sparse or was not accurate. So here are the general, the accommodations in the guidance from the Department of Ed that were given. And I'd ask Val, if I say something incorrect here or something needs to be clarified, please step in and do that. So the Department of Education has expressly said in the guidance, they prefer to use National School Lunch Program data from 2020-2021, census poverty data inclusive, if it's available. But they're also the ones who provided that waiver to collect that data, so they know that if it is not available, there need to be alternative methods to collect that. They suggest alternative data sources. They also say this might require using multiple years. I'll just say, in review of the guidance from last year to this year, it's almost the same. There is one really big key difference that I saw here. Whole bunch of moving parts here. This is within LEA districts, so those big districts that have multiple schools and you need to rank and serve, if you're determining alternate student accounts or you're determining alternate poverty percentages in that rank and serve, here is the guidance that the Department of Ed has given. So if you don't have national school lunch data from the last couple of years, you can use Medicaid, TANF, a composite of these two from 21-22, the best available school lunch data that you have, which may come from 2019. National school lunch data from 2020, 2021, 22 that may be accessible through your community eligibility program. They also have that indicator in there so that you can get a more accurate count as it relates to the percentages of the poverty level, which are higher for free and reduced lunch than they are for your community eligibility programs, adjusted by 1.6. You take those, you multiply them. And here's the new one that the Department of Ed included: a combination of the best available school lunch data from 2019, 2020, 2021, or 21-22. That's new. A composite of all of the TANF or Medicaid data. And if you have data that was from a survey that replicates that school lunch data or Medicaid or TANF. So what in all of these bullet points is the Department of Education really saying in your rank and serve or your alternate calculations for student counts and percentages? Essentially, they're saying, look at all the data you have and make the best decision you can with that data. So they've given a lot of flexibility here to do that. I think as long as you're rational and logical in those determinations, you have access to the data from which you're making these calculations, I think you'd be okay moving forward. Any questions about that? And Val, if there's any corrections or clarifications, please.
I have a question.
Yes.
I'm new. I'll be doing this next year for Eureka Elementary. How do we have access to Medicaid or TANF data?
That's a good question. So I would send that question out to the group. Is there somebody from another LEA or school who could answer that question for Karen? Nobody knows how you access Medicaid and TANF data?
It's
Well,
usually done through the school lunch program, as far as I'm aware.
Okay. And Becky Peters, if you wouldn't mind jotting down that question specifically so we can get back to Karen, and we'll put that in our list of stuff we sent out. Is that okay, Karen, to do that? Because that's a great question. Other questions before we move on here? Okay, the next piece of updated guidance from the Department of Ed. Well, these slides. So you'll see that they're essentially the same for special LEAs. This is again talking about alternative data that the state can use in determining those 4 federal statutory funding formulas for charter schools, as well as those LEAs that qualify for RLIS or rural low-income schools. Similar for small LEAs, there's just a couple of very small nuances, and these will be included in the slides that you can look at if you fall into this category. The next piece of data guidance from the Department of Ed, and I must say just at the onset here that yesterday I received an email from the Department of Education with updated guidance regarding equitable services for private schools, and they're asking for comments. The comment period, I believe, ends around the end of April, and that will mean final guidance regarding equitable services will come out after that, and we will share that with you. However, in review of it in comparison to what we did here at the national conference this year in New Orleans, I put in some highlights of what we heard here. So an LEA, if you have private schools in your area boundaries, you can choose in consultation with those private schools one of these following data sources to determine those equitable services. The same measure of poverty used for your public school children, comparable poverty data from survey results, comparable poverty data from a different source. So if you have access to those, and I apologize, Karen, I don't know how to get that access to Medicaid, TANF, or those community eligibility programs, the application of the low income percentage of each participating public school attendance area to the number of private school children who reside in that area. So a proportionality of students that attend your private schools. An equated measure, which I actually am not sure what that means. There is a note in this guidance that says, Ed notes, this may mean relying on National School Lunch Program data, which is the reason they're giving these following data sources as an alternative mechanism to provide equitable services. It's kind of a bit of I'm not exactly sure why the Department of Ed put that in there, but it is in there. Continue. Just a reminder, an LEA can make the determination of your equitable services. You can do this every 2 years. So you can use last year's data if it's the second year of a cycle. So for example, if you use 2019, 2020 data through your consultation with private schools to determine equitable services, you can use it for 2020, 21 and 21, 22. But if you already used that data for 2 consecutive years, You cannot use it for a third year. Are there any questions or any clarifications regarding that updated guidance? And like I said, there will be updated guidance after the comment period at the end of April from the Department of Ed, and we will share that with you. Okay. And as we move forward, we also understand we will be available and can access. Val and I have figured out how to construct just the right email to the Department of Ed, just snarky enough so that we get immediate response from Todd Stevenson and our program officer, Ariel Jacobs. Val perfected it and I implemented it, and we have been able to get responses. So as we move forward and you have specific questions, please contact us. Where we don't know the answer, we will get those answers for you. Okay, I'm going to turn the time over to our esteemed colleague, Christelle Estrada, who has some updates regarding Title III Refugee and Immigrant Programs. Take it away, Christelle.
So thanks, Max, and thank you for making something incredibly complex, at least understandable in relationship to funding. So I really appreciate that. So Title III, as you know, I'm just going to segue into the issue of funding, is not complicated at all, except for immigrant funding in relationship to just based on enrollment numbers for students learning English. So that grant, that Title III grant, again, is a part of Title I accountability. And we always get notification of the actual amount on June 30th in the official grant award. And then Tammy does the allocations, and 5% is always used for significant increase based on the formula that has been developed from the 2014 audit, which is a significant increase in students defined as immigrants, which means that they have not had continuous, been in our schools for 3 consecutive years. And so the increase in student population in relationship to students learning English, I'm not sure if we'll see an increase, but I've heard from many people, and especially those who are doing online education and charter schools, that there's been an increase of students learning English. And there's always an opportunity for those districts who don't qualify for the minimum amount of allocation, which is $10,000, to join a consortium. And so we have rural districts and other charter schools who join a consortium and sign an MOU. And then one of those LEAs become the fiscal agent. So that's how the law is actually designed. So I'm inviting all of you to the Title III April 21st meeting. I'll send out an invitation and send it to Max so he can send it out to everybody, because there are 2 significant pieces of legislation that have been passed. The first one is HB 302, and it's by Dan Johnson and Senator Thatcher. And it's called Education, Language Services, and Family Engagement Issues Related to How We Ensure the Civil Rights Obligations of Every School to Make Sure that families whose first language is not English, we have approximately 150 languages in the state, and how those services and the needs of those services for language and interpretation should be used. So that piece of legislation is really important. The person, Olivia Whiteley, who is the policy advocate person in the Western states, is now moving to Washington, D.C. Since I'm the USBE contact person, I'll be going over the legislation with you and responding to questions. And then the second bill is HB 230, which is Refugee and Immigrant Policies. This is related to enrollment. And the issues related to transcripts and the way in which students who have transcripts from other countries are benefited from their previous experiences without making judgments about them and not being able to evaluate those transcripts effectively, as well as discrepancies with birth certificates and other ways that mitigate the very expeditious enrollment of refugee students into Utah's system. So both of these had huge unanimous support in the House and the Senate and on the floor. And so again, we should be proud that this is another example of Utah responding to crises with Afghan refugees, with Ukrainian refugees, with those who are asylees, those who are immigrants. So this is one thing to be proud of in relationship to the responsiveness of creating welcoming environments. So those two things are really important. So I really invite you to be to attend the meeting, and it'll be virtual on April 21st. The second issue actually is related to this idea of observations and looking at data related to assessment capable learners. And so in that meeting, we'll actually talk about some of the observations that we've had with the USBE team and some of the excellent instructional practices that have supported the way in which students are getting access, not only to comments by teachers and support in relationship to interventions, but access to tier 1 instruction and access to grade level content. So it's about promising practices. And then the last thing is, anytime you would like to come with me on an observation, I think next year what we'll also do is we've identified some really promising practices across the state, and you'll get a list of those and opportunities to visit classrooms and spend time with either the district leadership that have done amazing, Wasatch as an example, of parent engagement. So I'm totally open to creating opportunities for identifying those practices so we can disseminate them. And I have to leave for another meeting, but you can always, in the contact information, email me, and I'd be happy to answer any of your questions. So thanks again, and thanks for the opportunity, Max, of inviting Title I colleagues to our April 21st meeting.
Thank you, Christelle, much appreciated. And like Christelle said, her contact information, if you have any questions or you're interested in participating in those monitoring visits, the very last slide has that contact information. And at this time, we are bringing to the stage our illustrious colleague, Val Murdoch. Let's talk about annual evaluations of family engagement. Val.
Thought I had muted myself. Hello, everyone. It's good to see everybody on the call today. I just put in the chat some resources, a list of resources that have to do with today's presentation. We're going to get a little bit lighter with the topics that we're presenting. Let me get my chat up there so I can see if anybody.
And just, I'm driving the slides, Val, so just let me know when you want me to switch.
Yeah, if I forget and I'm talking about something that's not on the slide, go ahead and change it too. Hopefully you've been able to access that Google Doc. And the first thing you might choose to do is go to the first resource, the self-assessment of family engagement, and make yourself a copy so you can make edits to it if you choose. We're going to discuss the annual evaluation of family engagement and have share some ideas that have come through LEAs that are doing some initiative and innovative work in this area. And next slide shows the learning intentions and success criteria. And basically getting familiar with what the requirements of the ESEA section 1116 is with regard to this annual evaluation. And the 3 success criteria are also on that document that you may have chosen to make a copy for yourself, are identifying 1 or more areas of strength related to your family engagement, identifying areas of growth, and then coming up with 1 or more ideas or revisions to things you already do to address identified areas of growth. And in the next slide, you just notice the color coding there because ESSA came along and amended the ESEA, replacing No Child Left Behind. And No Child Left Behind had asked us to create parent involvement policies. And there was that slight wording change to parent and family engagement policies, but the philosophy behind that change is enormous. From involving parents, just getting them into the building, which is important, to actually engaging them and making them equal partners in this education process. The first part of this annual evaluation tool that you fill out is, says LEAs conduct with meaningful involvement. And so they reverted to the word involvement, but it means they're getting there, you have access to them and their feedback. So meaningful involvement of parent and family members, an annual evaluation of the content and effectiveness of the parent and family engagement policy in improving the academic quality of all Title I schools. That's a big lift. And I've had the opportunity to visit with many of you over the years, and I get this question repeatedly from experienced personnel to brand new Title I directors who say, well, how do you conduct a meaningful annual evaluation? Max, if you'll go to the next slide, you'll see the first resource, a screen grab of the first resource that is on that resources list. This was introduced into the DMI this school year. It's just a self-assessment. You just click boxes that have to do with each one of these parts that I've broken this section of parent-family engagement down into these seven line items, we'll call them. Next year, there will be 3 reflection questions added to that self-assessment. And so you can take a look at that if you've made a copy of that. And Max, if you'll go to the next slide, what better way to break down something complex like this passage in the ESEA than to turn it into a bingo, or in this instance, a FAML game. So what I've done is I've taken each of those 7 lines and I've put them into just a few words on this FAML board. So line 1 is actually represented by F1 and A1. So evaluating, revising that policy and with meaningful involvement of family members. Determining the barriers is to further family engagement is line 2. Line 3 has to do with, as you're determining the barriers, focusing on specific demographic groups, which are very similar to the demographic groups that we look at for TSI. And then the middle section is in line 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So data, you can tell, data is pretty important in this whole process. 4 is under F, so I didn't go in order. 4 has to do with determining through data what family needs to be able to assist with their children's learning. And M5 is doing the same thing, but determining family needs as it has to do with engaging with the school. We don't think about parents needing support, skill building to be able to successfully engage with the school. A6 has to do with very similar, ensuring that there are successful interactions between the family and the school. And then 7 is taking all this information that you've gathered, all this feedback, and designing evidence-based practices and strategies to address those needs that you've identified. What I have done is in that final column on the self-assessment, that those who marked innovative implementation during this, when they uploaded to the DMI, I tried to keep track of all those that identified that they had an innovative implementation. And then I reached out to them and asked them to share with me what it is they're doing that they perceive as innovative. And I'd like to take the rest of the time just to share some of their ideas with you. Now, in doing this, I've taken something that is very complex, that has gone a lot of planning into it, and I've reduced it to 2 slides, one to 2 slides for each of the LEAs. And I noticed that every single one of them are here. So if they would like to add additional information into the chat, if you have questions for them, please put them in the chat. And hopefully you can get more information from these LEAs. On the next slide, the first LEA I'd like to start with is Weber County School District. And they have an annual family engagement night at the district level. And Lori Rasmussen explained this process as we were conducting a monitoring visit with them this year. And it was amazing. It kind of blew my mind and opened the door, I think, to the struggle that many districts, larger districts, have when they're trying to evaluate family engagement in a meaningful way. So based out of COVID brought a lot of great things when it comes to family engagement. Instead of having representatives from each of the 7 Title I elementary schools come to the district office, those parents and family members met at each of their neighborhood schools. And they all participated in a virtual meeting with the district. So all 7 schools on the same Zoom with the district leaders. And the fact that they got to stay at their own school, and the district ensured that there was food available each of the 7 sites, they felt much more comfortable to engage in conversations around the LEA plan, around any changes they would suggest for the goals based on current data. And each school community was able to discuss first and then share out collectively. Yes, you will get the slides, Greg. And so I'm just affectionately, on JLO, I'm calling the Weber WECO school district. Lori came up with these questions to ask each of the school communities. And you'll notice that they're word for word almost from the ESEA section 1116, but they're broken out into ways that are parent friendly, and that the parents were able to give more information sitting in their school communities, talking to each other, than they ever gave as a group at the district office. I know that Washington County, Amy has similar questions that she uses for her families, and Missy in Murray also uses similar questions. Many of you probably use these questions, but to get the feedback that you need based on the statute, it seems to make sense to use questions that are worded in similar ways. So let's go to our bingo, our FAMO board. And I would like you to, thank you for reading my mind. So on the FAMO board, would you put in the chat, or if you don't like doing answers publicly, you can just in your own mind, identify one box where you would put your bean, or more than one box. What parts of this requirement did WECO fulfill in their LEA family engagement night? You can put F1, or you could put data, however you'd like to share. Anyone? Thanks, Lindsay. Definitely A1. F3, data was collected for sure. Thank you. Thank you for playing along. Now, just because I have more information that I was able to share, I almost filled my entire bingo card. what Weber was doing was collecting a lot of feedback, a lot of data in order, Max, will you go to the next slide, sorry, in order to design their evidence-based practices and strategies. So I filled up my entire board almost, except
Let me
for
grab it.
Nicolia, could you mute yourself? Thanks. The next slide shows you a charter school, Salt Lake Center for Science Education, AKA SLCSE, a secondary charter in Salt Lake, grades 8-12, and Brittany Powell is the principal. And Brittany checked, I think, just one of those innovative implementation boxes. This is a practice that also came out of COVID, is that each family, each student and their family were assigned a teacher mentor. And that averaged out to be about 20 families per teacher. And before school, the teachers reached out to all of their families for an initial contact through phone calls, mostly. And then they continued to contact the families regularly during the school year. The main purpose of this was to check in regarding needs and regarding concerns. So needs regarding technology, academic needs and resource needs of the home, as well as any concerns about grades or attendance. Let's go to the next slide and look at our FAML board. And just with that brief description, where would you put a bean or two? Okay, we're moving into some the M column. Okay, so on my board, if you go to the next slide, it may differ from your board, but they definitely had a teacher mentor to determine any barriers that they might have. Do you need technology? Do you have access to the internet? So they were able to identify needs. Now, it might not have been according to different demographic groups, but they had specific needs of individual families. They were able to successfully have interactions with the families and also understand what needs the family had to engage with the school, as well as assist with learning. And I checked the design evidence-based practice because if you go to that third resource on the resources page, I have a draft from the Connecticut State Department of Education. They have a draft guide of evidence-based practices when it comes to family engagement. And one of the areas you'll notice on there identifies tier 2 or moderate evidence when it comes to structured conversations between teachers and parents about student learning that happen multiple times during the year. So I did click that as an evidence-based strategy. Let's go to the next one. Washington County School District, they have Pie Nights. And this has evolved over the last couple of years. Prior to COVID, several principals of the 6 out of the 11 Title I elementary school principals visited Davis School District and got to observe their APTT, or their academic parent teacher team process. And the principals, Amy, came away with this, yes, we need to implement this. It would be so great. And then COVID hit. And so they've made some changes and iterations over the past couple of years. And what has happened is most of the Title I schools have adopted a hybrid Pie Night. So Pie meaning parents in education, and they have replaced just the traditional parent-teacher conferences. There's an APTT portion, and there's a one-on-one parent-teacher conference, because any of you that have tried to get rid of parent-teacher conferences and replace them with APTT may have run into this. But what about my one-on-one time with the teacher? And so most schools offer this hybrid combination. And Washington County or I affectionately call WACO or WACO, however you want to say that, is they have a grade level specialist for each grade for the elementary schools. I think it's just elementary schools. You can correct me, Amy, if it's different. But they have a grade level specialist, and that grade level specialist designed parent game template, data spreadsheets, and a slideshow representing the most critical skills of this identified standards that they empowered the teachers to be able to share data with the parents. Oh, Amy's asking questions. She's not providing information. Let's go on to the next slide. Washington County collected data based on pre and post Pi nights. So you'll notice this year in 2022, those parents who have responded that the staff, in their perception, the staff demonstrate that learning is a high priority, has gone up significantly in the strongly agree category. So it went up from 38% strongly agree to 60% strongly agree. And you'll notice that the other three, the lower three, have gone from about 10% to 3%, either saying they disagree, strongly disagree, or no basis for judgment. So parents got an insight to the expectations that schools have of learning and that all students will learn. In another data point showed that meaningful parent contact at Pi nights was 94%, was rated at 94%. So they have data to back up that this information is helping to give insight to parents. And Amy might have more information that they gained also that you can share in the chat. Let's go to the next slide of the FAML board. And on that FAML board, where would you place your beans? And Lori, just if you're listening in this section, Amy has a question about what month you hold your family engagement district meeting. Okay, so Karen identified A1, A2, maybe blackout from Lorraine. Another A2. Okay, going to the next slide. I don't think that the purpose of this was to empower parents with information and to engage in successful interactions based on evidence-based practices. And so it wasn't necessarily to evaluate or revise the policy, although they certainly could do this with the data that they're gathering. You're exactly right. And those interactions with teachers, the APTT component, could be much more meaningful, and I can see why many of you marked A1. And Lori said all of the meetings are held early in the fall. Thanks, Lori. Okay, going on to the next LEA, Esperanza Elementary is a charter elementary grades. Ty Love is the federal programs director. And Esperanza has been doing home visits for quite a few years. It's a charter that's very dedicated to home visits and has found a lot of success through those home visits. As most of you know, home visits are an evidence-based practice as long as they're relational, that the purpose of them is to build the relationship rather than to say, hey, where's your child? The evidence has found that those schools that implement home visits, their students are 24% less likely to have, they have 24% fewer absences than students do not receive home visits, that families do not receive home visits. And the same visits are much more likely to read at or above grade level compared with students who do not receive that home visit. Something that Esperanza has are parent engagement, is a parent engagement committee. I don't know that that has occurred to a lot of LEAs. We could have our own parent engagement committee. Let's empower parents to be part of this committee that's dedicated to engaging parents. One thing that their committee does is meeting to organize and coordinate family-focused events. In fact, just recently they held Healthy Minds, which were multiple workshops, both online and in person, in both English and Spanish. And not only are they having one home visit at the beginning of the school year, but they're having another home visit in order to help parents understand the upcoming end of year and end of level testing. If you go to the next slide on our FAML board, where would you put a bean as far as Esperanza, one or more beans? M5, definitely engaging, helping families engage with the school. A6, successful interactions, a lot of A6, M5. And then of course the M7, the evidence-based practices there. Let's go to the next slide, Max. And again, since we don't have a rubric, this is my opinion. Another thing I wanted to say is when parents and family members are given opportunities to be leaders in the community, like that committee dedicated to family engagement, that is also an evidence-based practice for increasing engagement. On the next slide, you'll see Cache County School District. This practice also emerged from COVID. They have 5 Title I elementary schools, and Robin Clement is the director of elementary curriculum and federal programs. They initiated weekly phone calls with students who are multilingual learners, with the families of students who are multilingual learners. Teachers monitored the students' academic data and checked in weekly with parents. They also had access to the parent liaison who is Spanish speaking. And if needed, the district delivered emergency meals as well. Home visits provided personalized training on how to set up the computer, and as well as how to access software, programs, and apps. If we go to the FAMO card, where would you put your bean for Cache County and these weekly phone calls to families of multilingual learners? Thanks to those of you who are playing on here. A4 is A4. Oh, okay, so you're saying A4 data for number 4. Well, you're getting specific. That was great. F3, the demographic groups as far as determining barriers. Exactly. If you go to the next slide, we had bingo in FAMO in a couple directions, but that really honing in on a demographic group that was struggling more than perhaps others were. There is, if you reference that Connecticut State Department guide, they have a section that says that parents who provide weekly text messages, now these were phone calls, so it's not exactly the same, but weekly text messages about children's progress, just giving parents a 1-sentence message from teachers about the children's schoolwork, empowered parents to support students' efforts in getting coursework credits toward graduation. So this was done at the high school level, not at the elementary where CASHES was focused. Our last LEA that I would like to look at is Granite School District, and they have been focusing on data literacy. Any of you who attended the National ESEA conference and were able to listen in or attend this session that Aaron and Joan put on from Granite, probably walked away with some excellent ideas. If you have access still to the online version, to the virtual recordings of that conference, I would encourage you to look up Friday's session. I think it was at 1 p.m. And if you can't access that, I'm going to try to figure out a way we can bootleg it maybe you have access to it, Erin, that you can share it with us, because it was excellent. The majority of it, it was actually building data literacy with all stakeholders. So starting with teachers and building principals and getting them comfortable, kind of like Washington County did, where the grade level specialists really helped and worked with the teachers to get more comfortable with sharing data with parents and with their students. Okay, Erin is willing to share the slide deck, and I actually have access to that. So what I will do is after I'm finished, I will add that to a resource list on the Google list, so you will have access to that. Thanks for making that available, Erin. So what Granite did is, again, on that building data literacy among all stakeholders, they focused on helping students understand their own data and setting goals for themselves. And then they also included those data for parents and family members to be able to understand their students' progress and how they could support them at home. Something that Erin and Joan did that I thought was very helpful was to create video models. One of them took the role of a parent, and one of them took the role of a teacher. And they showed how the teacher could accomplish 4 goals that Granite was very focused on. The goals included just how to build that connection with parents and family members, how to walk through the data with the family member, how to partner with parents, how to establish that co-partnership and giving them ownership to support their student at home, as well as establishing a plan moving forward. So in the next slide, you'll see something that's probably really confusing because it's really small, but when you see the slide deck, it will make more sense. Granite School District spent a lot of time taking data and making visual representations. So in the first representation, this is for middle school. So it shows the students' progress over time from elementary to, I believe, 8th grade. The next one shows kindergarten, like the keep of where they are beginning of year, and then where the goal would be for end of year. And I know I'm probably messing this up. When you see a larger version of this slide, I would invite you to pay attention to the very bottom, because the teacher is able to take the parent or family member through, this is where your child was at the beginning of the year. And then on Pathways of Progress, they made this kind of growth. And then that put them at MOY doing this, and then setting a goal for end of year with the student, and then letting the parent know about that. And I know I've messed that up, Erin, so please clarify. It's complex, but beautiful in the complexity. And then you see in the last image, the WIDA scores. So helping parents of multilingual learners understand data and how they're doing in different aspects in listening, reading, speaking, writing over time. So if we go to the FAML board on the next slide, again, last opportunity to put your beans down. And where would you put your beans? Thanks, Amy. We have A2, meaningful involvement. F4, assisting family with learning. Oh, sorry, thank you for saying that, Tracy. So what I left off is, after the teacher went through all the resources, they didn't just leave it at that and say, your child's in red. Sorry, they're still in red. What they did is they said, your student is showing that they need more help in these areas, and they had specific resources to go along with those specific identified needs. I also failed to mention that the resources were an idea that came up from a parent group that Erin was working with to get feedback from. And the parents said, well, we need help to be able to help our children at home. And so they had specific resources to go along with the data reports that they were presenting to parents. And in addition, they just had a grade level packet of QR codes that all the parent had to do is take a picture of the QR code and it would take them to grade level resources as well. So just a plethora of amazing things in this one activity. So if you'll go to the next slide, you'll see that I was tempted to do a FAM out for Granite School District. It wasn't really an evaluation of the policy, how effective the policy was, but in a sense, Erin was meeting with that family group in order to get feedback, and they came up with this very meaningful activity as a way to share data with families. So I'm not seeing questions, but I know the chat's kind of moving faster than I move in my multitasking inability. If you'll go to the last slide, Max, I just want to bring you back to that, the requirement for the DMI next year. Again, you'll be self-assessing in each of these line items, breaking it down so you can look at where you're doing really well, where you want to grow, and what are some ideas that you would like to incorporate or revisions that you would like to incorporate into your engagement process. Oh, thanks, Erin. Erin's going to email the resource doc. Oh my goodness. For $20, you can have access to that on the Google Doc. So what questions can we answer? I think we have 3 minutes left. I know it's worth much more than $20, right, Carrie? All right, well, if there are no other questions, then thank you so much to those 6 LEAs that shared their ideas, their innovative practices. And then Susan's willing to go up to $25 on that. So again, some great things are happening. This is a very hard concept, but once you dig into it, once you start breaking it down, it becomes much easier. And I'll just turn it right back over to you, Max. Thanks.
Thanks, Val. This time, 9:45, why don't we pause here and take a 10-minute comfort break, get a drink, do whatever we need, and we'll meet back here 9:55 just to make it a weird, awkward number. And then we'll start with Leslie Evans talking about updates regarding school improvement. So I'll see you back here at 9:55. Welcome back, everybody. We will move on. I've got Leslie Evans in the office here with me, and we're going to switch seats. So when she sits down here in this seat, just remember it's Leslie, not Max, and I'll let her control her slides. So school improvement reminders and updates. Leslie Evans.
Okay, thanks, Max, for helping me with my technical issues this morning. In the chat, I just put a copy of the PowerPoint for this segment. So I hope it's all accessible. And there are some links as we go through, especially some of the Title I slides, links to mock data and access to data on the website. So I just thought you might want to have that available to you. So today I'm going to go over school improvement reminders, summer reminders, and summer updates. And I will cover CSI, TSI, and what's going to happen in fall for 22 identifications. So first, starting off with comprehensive support and improvement. And I do want to say I wish I had a bingo game to make this more interactive and for it to be more high quality instruction. So shout out to Val for that. So as a reminder, comprehensive support and improvement schools, there are 2 different categories. One is called overall performance, and those are the schools that for 3 years on average, they are falling into the lowest 5% of Title I schools. So that's CSI overall. A copy of the ESSA state plan is linked there. And just a reminder that when we say fell into the lowest 5% of all Title I schools, we're talking about points earned out of points possible in the accountability system. And a reminder that there are different indicators for elementary and middle schools with additional indicators for high schools. And I'll go into depth on that for the TSI category here in a minute. This shows a points breakdown for those two pie graphs that were just shown. Noticing that this extra high school indicator, post-secondary readiness, is broken into 3 pieces. So what's pertinent right now is that the CSI schools that were identified for overall performance in 18-19 are nearing the end of their 4-year identification. And though the pandemic was very disruptive, has been very disruptive, because the exit criteria was set, as you see in the black box, that in 21-22 or at the end of 21-22, those schools who are above the 15% mark of Title I schools will exit. So technically there was no interruption to the 4-year cycle for these schools. So at the end of 21-22, we will see how those schools did. And if you're above 15%, they exit. And if they're below 15%, we'll talk a little bit more about what happens in the next couple slides. It's not drastic, I should say, and it's not too scary, I don't think. To access data, so if you were interested in looking at the information that identified these schools, or you're looking at tracking your school's progress in the accountability system, a reminder that you go to the Accountability and Assessment website, and then there's a Reports tab. And under the Reports tab, you'll see rank lists. Those rank lists show the school's points earned, and it's listed by accountability indicator, meaning by these pieces of the pie. At the end of 21-22, a new rank list will be published, but there were no rank lists published for 19-20 or 2021. It is worth noting that many LEAs with CSI overall performance schools have requested a rank list just for information purposes for 2021. And I'm here to report that data and statistics are still trying to make sure that that is accurate and usable, and it will be sent out to CSI schools and LEAs as soon as possible. Please, I forgot to mention, if there are questions as I roll along here, please feel free to unmute, raise your hand, or follow the chat, and Becky Peters will give me a heads up if there's a question. So schools, if at the end of 21-22, the identified CSI overall performance schools do not exit, this is the basic process that's written into rule. So a state review panel is assembled, and there are many details about how that panel is comprised and what considerations they take. So the state review panel is assembled. If the school is a district school, the local school board will need to get input from the community, also detailed in the rule. And in conjunction with the district, make a recommendation to USBE. Similarly, if the school is a charter school, the charter school authorizer, which is the Utah State Charter School Board in most cases, will also gather input from the community and present their recommendations to the state board. Again, if this is specific to your LEA in your school, we'll give you many details and are happy to answer any questions. So once that review panel meets and the local school board with community input or the charter school authorizer with community input provide recommendations, then the state board compiles those recommendations and can do some of the following actions. Require personnel changes, involuntary transfers, local school board could change the school boundaries, et cetera, et cetera. In our experience, this is the first exit we've ever done for CSI overall performance, but in cases of state turnaround which abides by these same pieces of the rule. In all cases so far, the board has elected to take other action. And that other action has often looked like an extension or added support, those kinds of things. So while these first few bullet points seem very heavy-handed or top-down, the experience we've had is that they are often taking other action. Similarly, for charter schools, you have a similar actions that the board could take after they review the state review panel and the charter authorizer and community input. But again, we're often seeing the take other action. If you'd like to dig into the rule, I had it up on the slide before. I wanted to cover quickly for CSI some of the awards that are still in Utah Grants Management. Because in the 20 T1 SF grant was extended, notice that it expires in this fall, 9/30/22. And that is exactly the same expiration date for 21 T1 SF, which was only a formula grant. In 20 T1 SF, we had formula and competitive. And then for 2022, those funds expire 9/30/23. While I was reviewing these grants and the allocations still in Utah Grants Management, I wanted to remind everyone that 21 T1 SF also had a sustainability grant for all Title I. So make sure you're seeing both the sustainability grant for 21 T1 SF, which is just for extra Title I dollars essentially. And then there's also the comprehensive support and improvement formula grant for 21. So the other category of CSI are schools that are in for low graduation rate. I'm in very regular contact with those schools and LEAs, but if you have any questions, once again, their exit was not impacted by the pandemic since graduation rates have been calculated every year. So I elected not to cover that, to go into TSI a little bit more in depth, acknowledging that TSI was first identified in 1819 as well, and a number of schools were identified. And due to the pandemic, there has not been a ton of communication. So I wanted to go over in depth how those student groups are identified, what the timelines look like for the two cohorts that were identified, one in fall 18 and another in fall 19, none in 20 and none in 21. I'll go through those here in a minute. So TSI student groups are identified if for 2 consecutive years, any of those student groups fall into the lowest performing 5% of all schools in the state's accountability system. And those student groups include students who are economically disadvantaged, those who have disabilities, who are learning English, or are from a major racial or ethnic group. A reminder that we didn't identify in 1920 or 2021, and another reminder that this category of school improvement, TSI, largely rests in the purview of the LEA. So the district or charter LEA is responsible to know which student groups and from which schools are identified, and then to create a plan that will lead to closing the gap for those student groups. Though that plan does not need to be submitted to USBE, but it is the LEA's responsibility to have one for each student group and in each school. This shows the summary of when we identified in fall 18 and fall 19. It's a conglomeration of all the student groups identified in Utah. And so you'll see some of the trends. The only student group that is not shown on this table are students who are Asian. because no schools were identified for having 2 consecutive years of that student group below 5%. So you'll see that students with disabilities student group makes up the majority, 40% of the student groups identified in Utah, followed by English language learners. So reminder that if your school is an elementary or a middle school, these are the indicators, just like how the whole school accountability system, when the schools are ranked for CSI, the school as a whole is run through that accountability system. So they look at proficiency, growth, English learner progress, and growth of lowest 25%. When we're talking about TSI, when you're looking at data, it's the student group that's run through all of these accountability indicators. And we'll have a chance to look at some data and to look at some mock data so that this is clear. A reminder that high school adds this post-secondary readiness indicator that is broken up into 3 pieces. So when you see that post-secondary readiness counts for 75 points or 33% of the accountability system, this is the 33%. With high school graduation, ACT, and advanced coursework making up 1/3 of that larger indicator. So now I hope it's valuable. I know some people have joined some of the TSI information sessions we've been having, but I wanted to go through each indicator and remind you that there is an accountability technical manual that breaks all of these calculations down so that you are able to see transparent data about your school's student groups. So again, when the student groups are run, they're run through all of these indicators. And one of the first ones is achievement. There's 56 points possible for both elementary and secondary. Well, you can see the difference there. And then it's broken down by the 3 content areas: English language arts, math, and science. The next indicator is the growth indicator. It's equal to the achievement indicator, and I think that's interesting to note that achievement and growth are counting. I think I can turn that off. Let me see. Okay. And so growth is calculated traditionally in our system by whether a student met their student growth target and the amount of growth that the student made as determined by their student growth percentile. Then you have the growth of the lowest 25% indicator, which takes the lowest 25% of performance kids that fall into that category. And they often as well as counting the growth of the lowest 25%. I just got the internet connection is unstable, so please let me know if I'm breaking up or. Yeah. The next indicator is the WIDA, or the English Learner Progress Indicator, where this indicator measures English learners, students' academic language development and proficiency in English. It is not a reflection of the students' performance in the core curriculum or on RISE. In other words, it's just to show their development and proficiency in learning English. Of course, Dr. Estrada is the expert in this field and can explain all the nuance. I shared some of the most basic pieces of this indicator, but I encourage you, if you have a student group, if the EL student group is one of the student groups for which your school is identified, that you dig into how this indicator is calculated in the technical manual that I linked down below. Okay, so the progress charts show how it is calculated, and you'll see them in the technical manual, but essentially it takes into consideration the student's initial grade level, of becoming an English learner, according to WIDA, and it takes into account their proficiency level at first and their time enrolled in school with supportive English instruction. This is that additional indicator for high schools, and it's called post-secondary readiness in the aggregate. But when you break it down, there are 25 points possible for graduation rate, 25 points possible for ACT, and 25 points possible for readiness coursework. And this is another indicator that if your school is a high school and you're looking at your data for either TSI or CSI or just overall performance, that it's important to dig into it because there are a lot of details and ways to leverage and maybe change some practices in your school to increase these points earned. For me, this is just a slide that shows the difference between the overall calculation or rank list and how we get to the TSI student group list. So first, like I said, the accountability system is run for all schools and LEAs, so in the aggregate, and then we rank order those schools by points earned out of points possible. And that's where the 5% cut score comes from. So if you remember, TSI schools or student groups are identified when for 2 consecutive years, that student group is below the lowest 5% of all schools. That's where that lowest 5% comes from. So once that 5% cut score is calculated, we run the accountability system for student groups. And then the question is asked, does the school have any student group performing below the 5% cut for 2 consecutive years? And if they do, then that student group is identified for targeted support and improvement. A couple reminders in the box above. I think I already covered the 20 and 21. We will identify in 22, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And just a reminder that if your school is already in CSI or in the state turnaround program, those years do not count towards identification for TSI. This is a reminder on the exit, and again, I'll go through some timelines and examples. But when for 2 consecutive years, the student group is above the lowest 5% of all schools, then that student group will exit. And each student group is beholden to that exit criteria. A reminder of what I just said about how the 5% cut score is calculated, and then a link to the list to see if your school is on the TSI list. Breathing. Any questions so far? Anything I can help? Maybe this will help. In fall 18, that was the first cohort of schools identified for having student groups below 5% 2 years in a row. So we had year 1 in 18-19. And then remember, we're not counting 20 or 21. And so year 2, to demonstrate that consecutive years above 5% is the end of this school year. So there are a handful of schools who were above 5%, whose student groups were above 5% in 18-19, and 21-22 will count as the consecutive year. So keep that in mind, and then take a look at this picture. That hopefully is helpful. So this pretend school maybe has, I hope, 5 student groups. There are some cases that have 5 student groups. So if there's students with disabilities, we're not above the 5% cut in 18-19 and not above at the end of this school year 21-22, but they were above in 22-23 and 23-24, they would exit in year 4. Remember, we need 2 consecutive years of exit. For this English learner student group, they were above in 18-19, dipped back down in 21-22, we're back up in 22-23, and not in 23-24. So they have not had 2 consecutive years above 5%, and therefore they would not exit TSI. As written in our ESSA state plan, if the school is Title I, the school is identified for comprehensive support and improvement. If they're not Title I, we don't have any detailed information on that yet. But since I'm at a Title I directors meeting, I think we're mostly concerned with Title I schools. This category or this code is economically disadvantaged. And so in this case, this student group would have exited in year 2. And then you can see the example for an exit in year 3, etc. So it's important to note that if their student group was identified in fall 18, they're beholden to this timeline, to the one we just saw and that's shown in this picture. If your school's student group were identified in fall 19, they're considered to be in that second cohort. And so the first year would have been 1920 and 2021. So we kind of skip over all that and we count the end of this school year as year 1 toward the 4-year timeline. And so exit calculations would look like this for that group. Year 1, as you'll see, is 21, 22. Year 2, 22, 23, and then consecutively, because nothing else is going to happen, no big pandemics or accountability irregularities, right? So in this case, students with disabilities would exit in year 4. The student group for EL would not exit. And that school, if it were Title I, would then become CSI. You can follow the rest of those examples. So I wanted to take some time to access the data and have you access your data. So a reminder that if you go to schools.utah.gov and go to the Assessment and Accountability Department, right here, it should look like that green bar at the top. There is a resources tab in the program menu shown right here. And if you click 1819 to open this TSI spreadsheet, you'll see both a list of schools that were identified in fall 18, as well as one of those that were identified in fall 19. So I keep saying aggregate. I can't think of another word, but it's all together, both identifications of TSI. So I'm hoping that you are able to open the slides that I linked in the chat and that you can use these links or at your leisure at another time. But while you're looking at your data, I wanted to go over some of the columns in the driving someone else's car, so it's a little hard. How do I put that up there? You don't know?
Stop sharing that. Share
Okay.
the other.
Okay. Okay. So I'm hoping you can see, and now you use this mouse. You don't ever use this as a screen? No. Sorry, technical difficulties here. You can't ever, okay. There we go. Okay, so I hope now you're seeing a mock spreadsheet. This is real data, but is it showing?
No.
Okay. Thanks for your
There
patience.
you go.
Okay. Oops. Okay. So if you have your data open, or if you want to use this to remind yourself when you do have your data open, I've redacted and taken out a few columns for obvious reasons. But in this example, you'll see that the first column indicates that these student groups were identified or this is 19 data. It just tells you that this report was run at the end of the 18-19 school year. You can see that the school is an elementary, so we'll be thinking about this pie chart and these points for the accountability system. The made-up district and school. This Pinion Elementary have the student groups EL, students with disabilities, economically disadvantaged, and students who are Hispanic as the student groups identified. And then in column I, some of what I wanted to show is that it'll just be listed as achievement points. I've inserted the number of points that go into that column as a reference so that you can, and I suggest that perhaps you save your spreadsheet like that so you know how many points were possible. So in the achievement category, you can see how many points were earned for each student group. And same thing for growth. Again, I took the 56 points and put it at the top so that I can think of what the denominator is. This is that lowest quartile or growth of the lowest 25% points earned out of 25 points. And then EL progress points are out of 13 for elementary schools. And you can see how many points were earned for these two. Now, as a rule, in your EL student group, you will always see the EL points blank. And at first, that seems really counterintuitive. So I wanted to point out that there's a reason why. Remember, this is a measure that the students are in this student group, EL, by virtue of taking the WIDA, right? They've been categorized, or according to their assessment, are deserving of quality instruction in English. And so they would be double counting, to say it in short, if we were also to count these EL points for this student group. Okay, so in all cases, if you're looking at an EL student group, you will always see the EL points box blank. However, for students with disabilities, this is blank, and sometimes you'll see points in there. But what this means is that for the students with disabilities student group, there were not 10 or more students, because that's the minimum end size required for all student groups. There were not 10 or more students who are students with disabilities and also took WIDA or are categorized as EL. Please let me know if you have individual questions there.
JM has a question.
Oh, good.
Do we have the cut score list from spring of 2021 so we can see progress of those student groups at the schools?
So close, JM. There's still details. We've had maybe 3 iterations of the 2021, both overall and student group lists, just for information purposes, so you can gauge, and it is not finalized yet. Data and Statistics has not felt comfortable sharing it even for an information only. Maybe Tracy Vandeventer has an update more readily than I do.
No, but I am just going to add that part of it is because some schools have changed names and some schools have changed boundaries. And so that's also complicated our ability to rank, because during that 2-year gap, as we're trying to calculate growth, that slowed us down significantly as we're trying to make sure we have that ranking accurate.
Thank you. We really do want to get that information out, but we really want to make sure it's right. So remembering that the overall points possible for elementary and middle schools is 150. This is how many overall points, column P. Oh, notice these are blank because it's not a high school, right? So overall points earned for this student group for EL out of 150 was, or sorry, 137 is 33 points. And I'll explain why it's 137. Getting ahead of myself. So because only 3 indicators counted, remember the EL student group didn't have an EL points indicator. that those points, the 13 points, are subtracted from the total 150. So it doesn't count against that student group. And so the total possible is 137. And so this student group earned 33.54 points out of 137. And this is a very important column right here. Remember how I said there were two different timelines, two different cohorts. This is where you will find in column S what year that student group was identified. So remember, if they were identified in 18, you're going to follow the 18 timeline. And if they were identified in 19, you would follow the 19 timeline. At this point, due to the pandemic and calculation in column T, we kind of brush over it because it's not perfect looking back at these spreadsheets. But yeah, I don't know if there's more. If you have questions about column T, let me know. We can address them individually. I added to column U a little, I crossed out and added above 5% cut score. So when Data and Statistics made this spreadsheet, they put number of years in a row out of TSI. And that might be accurate, but not out of the program totally. What they meant was that this student group had 0 years above the 5% cut score. The student group below it had 1 year above the cut score. 1 year above the cut score, 0 years. And what that means is if you look at column B, this student group earned 24.48% of points possible. And the 5% cut for 18-19 was 34% of points. So 24% is below 34%. So they didn't exceed the 5% cut score. So that's why there's a 0 in that column. In this example, you can see that the student group, I believe it was EL, earned 36% of points possible when the cut score was 34%. And so it shows 1 year above the cut score. So if you remember, this cohort, the 18 cohort, has an opportunity to exit at the end of this school year. So this student group would have had 1 year above. So a quick look at high school. The only thing that's different, a reminder again, this is just when the report was run. It doesn't tell you in what year they were identified. But you'll notice that there are a lot more indicators possible here, right? That these three are calculated because this is in a high school right here. Okay. For the same reasons, the EL student group does not have points because that would be double counting. And then this students who are Pacific Islanders, there were not 10 or more students who also take WIDA and are of Pacific Islander descent. Okay. So remember, grad rate counts for 25, a third of the 75 points. So here's the total possible out of 25. Same with ACT, worth 25, and advanced coursework. And so going across, you'll notice that this Students with Disabilities student group earned 61 points out of 225 possible. So since all indicators calculated, there are 7 indicators, the total is 225. And they were identified in 2019. And you can see that because they earned 27%,
I just made
that
stuff
was-
up about your eyes or your focus or the lights based on what you've told me. Sorry.
I'm sorry. Oh, Tracy. Okay. So because they earned 27% of points, that was below the 34% cutoff. And so that student group has not yet exceeded 5%. But this student group has. because they earned 43% of points possible. That's above 34%. So they have one of the years above the 5% threshold. Okay, while I do the screen shuffle, please let me know if you have questions. Oh, that wasn't so bad. Is it still sharing the correct?
It is
No.
not.
Okay.
So down.
In this case, I like a backseat driver, but
There
most
you go.
times I do not. Okay. Okay, any questions about TSI? I hope that wasn't like too remedial for you, Title I directors, but I think there has been a lack of information out about TSI and the consequences and timelines. So I hope that was useful for you.
Leslie, I have a question.
Okay.
Just a clarification, and you might have said it, but I was writing so fast. On when they make it above the cut, is it 2 consecutive years or just 2 years in the 4 years?
2 consecutive years. Yeah.
Okay.
Back.
Backspace.
So just to be clear, I'm sure you're not the only one with that question. So if you refer back to these slides, it might help you remember that it has to be 2 years consecutively. And then because of the differences in timeline, like especially for the first cohort that skips 1920 and 2021, just remembering what consecutive years count. So for the 18 cohort, they would have had to have been above 5% in 1819 and then 21-22. Does that help, Robin? I think that was Robin.
Yes, that does. Thanks. I forgot about that.
You're welcome. That's okay. I know I was running through it. Again, I need a bingo board or another way to make this more interactive. So please send me ideas if you have some.
So if I could also just clarify, because Leslie has brought that up, that we are counting that data pre-pandemic. So if they also are above the lowest 5%, there are some TSI groups that could exit this coming, based on this coming spring data, if they have that in the fall as well, which is good news.
Yeah, if your student group's data looked like that, this student group economically disadvantaged in this case, they were above 5% in 1819, and they're above the 5% cut in 21-22, then that school would exit. But this cohort won't have that opportunity until the end of 22-23. Okay. Are we ready to talk about this coming fall? Ready or not? So let's go back. Well, let's talk about what the current cohort, what we're calling cohort 1 for CSI overall. Remember, those are the lowest 5% of Title I schools for 3 years on average, identified in 1819. The pandemic didn't affect our timeline. Now, we acknowledge it affected a lot of things, but it did not affect our timeline. And so those schools, and I've been in regular contact, reach out to me if you would like more information, but at the end of this school year, when the accountability system is run through all those indicators, and the schools are ranked, those schools from 1819 will need to be above the 15% cut for Title I schools. So we won't know until all that work is done. But as JM asked about, we are working on a 2021 list to give some idea with all the variables taken into consideration about the pandemic and the reliability of that data. But then at least schools have some information of where they may have fallen if 2021 accountability data was counted. Same thing with CSI low graduation rate schools. Those schools were identified in 1819 because they had 3 years below 67% graduation rate in the years leading up to 1819. And then as our ESSA plan states, they are beholden to being above 67% graduation rate at the end of 2021 and 21-22. And again, graduation rate was calculated every year. Analysts have not found a huge dip or change in the data, and so that data is being used. And these schools are readily aware of where they're at, whether they're going to exit or not, because they needed to be above that 67% in 2021, as well as at the end of this school year. Go into some nuance there, but again, those schools that are in that situation know who they are and what's going on. So since we had 2021 graduates count for this report card year, we do know where those schools sit. And so we'll be making those exit determinations before the end of this school year, so that we are less busy this coming fall when we need to identify for 2022. Which leads me to the 22 designations. We will be, due to U.S. Department of Ed requiring that we will identify CSI overall, CSI graduation rate, and TSI student groups. So then we will have an 18 TSI cohort, a 19 TSI cohort, and a 2022. So, like I said, the Department of Ed is requiring states to use their accountability systems and to follow their state plan in 22-23. They gave some flexibility to adjust some sections, and I'm going to go over some of those at a relatively high level, but with some detailed documents you can look at. So we do have a proposal submitted. It's called an addendum proposal for 1-year adjustments. And the way that USPE created its proposal to submit to US Ed was based on input from the Technical Advisory Committee, called TAC, and Assessment Accountability Policy Advisory Committee, called APAC. We also gathered public comment. You can view the ESSA addendum summary here at this link, but I've also pulled a few pieces out. So though TAC and APAC were posed with the requirement that we have to identify schools, many schools spoke out. Some states submitted lengthy reasons why this wouldn't be in the best interest, or why this is less than ideal. And those states' requests were denied. So the reality is we have to identify schools. And so brought to the APAC committee were these 4 options from our assessment and accountability and data and statistics group, led by Deputy Superintendent, Assistant Superintendent Darren Nielsen. So here are the 4 choices that were presented to APAC. We could average the 3 years and use pre-pandemic data. We could use 18, 19, and 2021 as consecutive years, which is pre-pandemic data, right? 18, 19. We could use the most recent consecutive years and calculate growth using skip year growth, or we could just identify 22 as a provisional and then identify again in 23. And so after, I believe it was like a 4-hour meeting and discussion of the folks in APAC, they decided the best choice is the one that's highlighted in blue, that will use the most recent consecutive years and use skip growth to calculate 2021. So let me talk to you about what that looks like. So when doing that, when calculating using only 2 years instead of 3, there was a proposal, and what we've submitted to US Ed is that we will adjust how we calculate student growth. So like I just went through all the accountability indicators for you, this is what growth looks like and has looked like since at least 18, but before that too, I think. That the growth indicator was calculated using a student growth percentile and a student growth target, the individual student target, and that's how the points were aggregated in the system. Study in other states, advice from the Center for Assessment indicate that student growth targets, this individual one right here, is very susceptible to the impacts, the disproportionate impacts the pandemic had on schools. And so many states, and our state included, are taking out this student growth target when we calculate growth. And so only the SGP will be used. This is my attempt at a summary for you, that in the case of CSI, we don't need an addendum because we're going to determine exit for cohort 1 based on the end of year this year. But we did need an addendum for the upcoming identification in fall 22, because we usually use 3 years of data. And what we really have, and what APAC suggested and what we submitted to US Ed, is that we really only have 2 years. And so we are going to designate the lowest 5% of Title I schools by averaging 2021 and 21-22 accountability data. One thing I didn't cover that was taken into very serious consideration when APAC met is that the message out to the field, everything that USBE told LEAs about 2021 data was it will never be used for accountability purposes. So I want to recognize that that was a central point and a central concern when APAC chose how to go forward. They ultimately decided that it was better to use the data we had in 2021 and use skip year growth from 18-19 was better than using pre-pandemic data or 3 years or having a provisional identification. So we'll use 2 years of data instead of 3, and therefore that's an addendum or a change to our ESSA state plan. So I've indicated that here. It's part of a proposal. It has not been fully approved by US Ed yet, but we have been in communication with them, and it looks like it's about to be approved. For CSI grad rate, we haven't needed to adjust anything because graduation rate has continued to be a data point that's collected. And then, whoops. And then for TSI, notice that in the TSI timelines, we're not counting 1920 and we're not counting 2021. And then the change for identifying TSI student groups in 22 is that we'll use skip year growth to calculate that 2-year consecutive below 5% criteria. Any questions yet?
There are some requests to have an opportunity to have technical assistance in walking through individual LEA data or school data.
Happy to do that anytime. Absolutely. You can reach out to me. My email is at the end of this slideshow. It's max.lang. Just kidding. It's leslie.evans@schools.utah.gov, but we'll go into that. So another little tweak in the addendum is that the schools identified in 2022 for CSI overall, just making sure I have right, yeah, that we're set. So it used to be, or in the normal ESSA state plan, the 5% cut and the 15% cut and all those things float as, you know, it's relative to other schools' performance. And in the case of this 22 designation, we thought it was important to keep that cut score static so that you have a predictable exit target. And I don't know how much more I have to say about that other than that's what's written into the plan for right now, for the 22 designations only. And then special for those 22 designations for CSI is that they could exit the next year, knowing the volatility of the data and knowing how affected everything was by the pandemic. we predicted that, it's possible a school could enter because they were the lowest 5% of Title I schools. But once, say, all kids test at the end of the next school year, or the effects of the pandemic are lessened at the end of the next school year, 2022-23, that school might be above 15%. So we wrote into the plan that that school may exit in the following year. But again, those schools still have the regular 4-year timeline. Anything I missed there, Tracy, feel free to chime in. Another reminder of this is the current growth indicator, and this is the growth indicator in the addendum. And then here's our contact information. I'm being very genuine that if your LEA or your school wants to walk through TSI data, I know that our team is more than happy to do that. We learn from looking at the data. We learn from your questions. So I encourage you to reach out. Reach out to me with specific questions for CSI, TSI. Tracy can also answer. And then I've included Anne Michelle Neal because she's our accountability specialist. So if you have detailed questions about, say, that post-secondary readiness indicator for high schools or WIDA or anything like that, she is a great contact for that, in addition to Dr. Estrada for program information for Title III.
And Leslie, I wanted you to know, I put in the chat that we would come up with a block of time and just send out an invite to Title I directors, the people who are part of this meeting here. And if they want to, they can jump in and we'll go through individual support for reviewing the data that you just kind of gave us a quick review of. So I think that we could also meet with them individually if they want in their LEA, even bring in their principals if they'd like. So there's multiple ways we can support you as you need.
Yeah, we can offer additional sessions like the other TSI sessions or have individual discussion.
There was another question from Elizabeth Bulkley about if they were on the 2019 list, are they definitely on the 2021 fall list?
You have to look at that. Is it column T? I'm a little afraid if I've memorized that. That says year identified for TSI. I know it's in the upper alphabet. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So make sure you're looking at that because remember column A just says when the report was run. And so it probably says 19 since you pulled up 18, 19. Okay. Any other questions before I turn Max back in charge of his car here? Okay.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to turn the time over to the director of the Utah USBE Center for Continuous School Improvement, Tracy Van Deventer, who's going to share some opportunities to participate and have data for the call survey.
Yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity. I don't want to take a lot of your time, but I want to provide you and your schools and your district with an opportunity to participate in the call survey if you see fit. My intention during this time is to give you a review of the 2 different call survey opportunities we have and to answer questions about how could you sign up and or participate if you have not. As well as those who have participated, an opportunity to take a second survey and to provide you with a little bit of background on how this can help support your school improvement planning that's taking place in your building and in your districts. Next. Just a reminder that Utah uses the 4 domains for rapid school improvement as our improvement framework. And here you can see those 4 main domains of turnaround leadership, talent development, instructional transformation, and culture shift. And when we work with schools who have been designated for various improvement supports, we use this 4 domains as a way for us to analyze and to identify needs that schools may have. And within those 4 domains, there are 3 practices that represent what we know to be impactful practices that result in student improvement and school proficiency. So I'm going to highlight on the next page, but I just want to pull that together, that within the center of all this work, of course, is student-centered and equity-driven. Everything we do within our school improvement work, of course, is to make the learning opportunities and the success for students at a higher level. But those 4 domains all play a role in that improvement process. Next. Here's a closer look at the actual practices. So 1.1, 1.2, 1.3 all fall within that turnaround leadership. 2.1, 2, and 3 are all within that talent development. 3, 1, and 2, and 3 all work around the instructional transformation, and 4.1, 4.2, 4.3 all are specifically aligned with the culture shift. And what's been interesting is, as we've been moving along through these surveys, we're starting to see some patterns that are evolving around where we're doing very well, and maybe where there's some areas for us as a state. And I appreciate this as I'm looking to try and make sure that the work we're doing is responsive to the needs in the field. We use these practices as a way for us to gauge where there may be some needs. Next. This is a snapshot view of a pretend school, and I wanted to let you know that after you complete the call survey, this would be at a building level, your school would have immediately this snapshot view, as well as a more comprehensive layered look at those practices and individual questions. And it is in comparison to the national average. So when we first looked at call, what we wanted was to provide schools with some information about lead indicators, or those practices that we know can result in increase in student success. We had this 2-year drought of not really having information to help us inform some of our work within the building. So our intention in pulling the call and making that available is that schools would be able to look at their practices within their building, especially because we're really not the same school that we were pre-pandemic. So this helps school leaders and their leadership teams review where they may be doing well, where they may be struggling. The color coding, green would be, of course, above the national average, red would be below, and the darker the color, the further either in standard deviation above or below that your school would be experiencing success. Next. And I wanted to give you a quick view of the district level overview. So this again is a pretend school district, but this shows, in this case, we have 4 schools within a district that have completed the survey, and you have that same snapshot data across each of those rows. So you have the call average, but then below that, you actually have the group, and that group represents the group of schools that are on this screen. So that's the average of those 4 schools. As a district, if you had multiple schools taking the call survey, you could organize them just by elementaries, or you could organize them just by TSI, or maybe just by TSI who have student groups with ELs. And when you group them and pull them together for this view, you as a district leader would be able to see the responses and what the patterns might be. And I'm so grateful for those who have taken time to do the survey, because at the state level, we have access to the same data, and we have been able to begin looking at some of the patterns that are evolving, because there might be areas where we as a state are doing better, maybe more strength there than we expected, and other areas where there may be some challenges. So it ties into our resource allocation review as well, where we can look at this and maybe consider how we could shift resources to help fill gaps if we believe that there is a need there based on some of the responses that we've received so far. So this is a peek at what you could see as a district if you had your buildings complete the survey with their teachers and paraprofessionals and administrators. But while I'm here, I also want to just highlight that there is a district LEA level survey that you can do for the call as well. We're just working through that right now. And what that looks like is district personnel would go through and complete the district 4 domain survey that again, ties in with those 4 domains: turnaround leadership, talent development, instructional transformation, and culture shift. And your building leaders would fill that survey out. And the intention of the LEA level or the district level call survey is to provide some information about how your district is responding to the needs of the buildings in their school improvement process. So if you were to have this screen here that helps you see where the strengths and challenges might be within your building. And then you could have a second level that's a district level review of how well the district is supporting. You would have some very rich information that could help drive school improvement planning at the district level in addition to the building level. Next. We know that this is the season of school improvement planning. We're just getting started, and I know some schools are already talking with their stakeholders and reviewing some of the data that they have so far. And of course, we'll have more at the end of the year. And we have these goals, and sometimes these are the same goals that we've been using all along, increasing our Acadience performance or increasing maybe our math UA plus results, et cetera. And we've had some strategies that we've been using. And in most cases, I think schools are using the strategies that they know, right? And that they have been applying as best they can. But one piece I think that the call can help is that there are opportunities for you to look at the results and find additional strategies and actions that can happen in the school to help support the school improvement planning process that your schools are working on. Next. Here's an example. For instance, a goal: increase student achievement from 27.2 to 30%. And the strategy is maybe my school is using an analysis of student work protocol. And that's been a strategy we've been working on. Within the call, there are 3 specific questions that might help you refine the actions to use the strategy of analyzing student work protocols to further build impetus towards reaching your goal. So you can see those 3 questions. 2.3.22 is domain 2, practice 3, question 22. And that's about scheduling time to discuss student work. And you could go into the call and see some specific results around each of these questions to see how well are we actually doing these 3 things that help us with the analysis of student work using that protocol. Next. Here's an example, for instance, of how a question could appear. It's not the same question, but you can see the rubric there, and it helps you see where the current state of your school might be, and then shows you what the next step up would be, the future state, if you were to improve that practice. I like being able to see those exact rubric, that language, to see what our next step would look like if we were to be successful in improving that. Next. On that section, you can also look at the strategies and suggestions, and it will pop open a list of ideas to consider on how you could improve specific questions, practices, and domains. Next. And this is what that screen looks like: strategies and suggestions. And this is within 2.3. So you have the practice description at the top, and then the example of how would this look in a school if people were to do this well. And then below that, it chunks it into questions. So that first group is 2.3.10, and there are strategies and suggestions that go with that question. If you were to scroll down, you would see more strategies and suggestions. Now, again, as a principal, I was always looking for ideas about how to try something new or something to support existing work that we were doing that could help me move the needle on specific goals that we had. At the very bottom, there's a section that's reflection questions for consideration, which I think is a powerful tool when you're pulling together your leadership team that's helping you with your school improvement plan to think about what are some other considerations we need to review as we're identifying some strategies for upcoming school plan. Next. So I wanted you to know that every school that participated in the fall are allowed to complete the survey again. And there are a number of districts here who have been in that situation. If you would like to have that opportunity for your schools to complete that survey, you just need to contact us so that we can set it up. What will happen is a new survey will open, and then your buildings will be able to participate with the new survey. And what's nice about that is your buildings then would have a snapshot with 2 rows. One would be for the fall of 2021, and one would be for the spring of 2022. And you would be able to see if you had made some progress within any of those practices and domains. Next. We also wanted to let you know that we're hoping to send out an invitation email out to all Title I and TSI principals that have not completed this call survey so far. We wanted to offer them the opportunity to complete the survey to help them in their school improvement planning if they choose. It's completely voluntary, but there are some licenses left. We are prepared to provide them with the professional learning and support if they do choose and have blocked out times for that to happen, which we've been conducting virtually through Zoom. So if you feel uncomfortable, however, and you do not want your district to have that invitation, you do not want your schools to participate, please let us know. Otherwise, we are expecting in about a week and a half. So we're at the middle of the week, but the following, not this coming Monday, but the following Monday, to send out an invitation out to Title I and TSI schools, just to say this is a tool that's available at no cost, takes 30 minutes to complete. If you pull your faculty together and set aside that 35 minutes, your staff can do that and complete that in that block of time, and you'd have the results immediately. And again, we've got professional learning that can take place to support their ability to review and to look at that data. So we wanted you to know and have that quick background so that if you have a principal that's like, oh, I don't know if I should do this, at least you've got some background to be able to speak to it. Again, not a requirement, but we have some licenses and we want to make sure that everybody who has some interest in using this tool for their school improvement planning process, that they have access to it. Next. And there's our contact information there. You've got my email, Leslie's email, and Ashley Arbuckle has joined us and is providing some support as an executive assistant, and often is helping us with making sure schools get signed up and ready, and helps us with some of the tracking of that information. So with that in mind, open for questions, and that's what I have for you right now. And I see that Lisa's got a question here. Is there a way that when you send out the invitation to the call survey to principals that you can CC? Perfect. Yep, absolutely. We will do that. And I do know that we've had a couple of schools in Jordan that did participate in the fall, and they haven't actually been able to hook into some training. They've been invited to a few different trainings, but they haven't jumped in. So we would want to follow up with those that had already participated as well. And my understanding is all of these slides, Max is going to be sending that out, and they're all one long connected slide deck. So these slides are included in the slides that Max is going to be sending out. So great question. Thank you. Other questions? Well, again, we are so grateful for those schools that have chosen to participate. It has been learning opportunities for us, especially when we look at those practices that we know connect to student success. It helps us see along the way without having to wait for the end of level assessment. At that point, sometimes it feels more like an autopsy, and this is about that school improvement work, right? What actions, what practices are taking place in the building. And we are grateful for that feedback as we work to try to make sure our resources are matching the needs that are out there. Thank you so much for your time.
Hey, thank you, Tracy. Much appreciated. At this time, I want to turn the time over to our team member, Camille Sheik, to provide some updates on summer programs and after-school program. Camille, the time is yours.
Thank you, Max. I'm just trying to get some information into the chat. So I'm Camille Sheik, oversee the 21st Century Community Learning Center grant, which supports after school and summer programming. I also oversee the set aside for after school and summer programming, the American Rescue Plan Act, so many acronyms, but basically myself and my colleague, Robert Palmer, we work to support after school and summer programs throughout the state. And recently, due to the increase in funding and emphasis on how after school and summer programs can really help accelerate the learning. We know our students and families have been through so much during the pandemic that after school and summer programs can help you achieve your goals, help school improvement. They can be an asset, and there is funding included in the many grant requirements, all the acronyms, ESSER Funds, ARPA. You can include after school and summer programming. So we're part of one of 9 states working to bring you more resources, training, whatever you need to help you build your school year after school and your summer program. So I put in the chat my contact information, as well as a one-page slide or one-page flyer that goes over exactly the project, some resources there if you're just like, well, we have some after school programs, we're doing good, we have summer, but some additional resources for you to check out. But also if you're interested in connecting with us, we're part of a team, which includes the Center for School Improvement, Special Ed. We're working with our nonprofit organization, Utah After School Network, who does a lot of our after school statewide conferences and training. So if you have any questions about where to start, aren't sure, please reach out to us. We want to support you wherever you are, including connecting you with other school district charter schools who have done after school for several years. If you want to connect with them, because they really are the experts, we want to help that kind of be the connector piece in building those relationships. So we know the funding will not last forever, but how do we build it into our systems after school and summer programming that can continue to support when the funding ends? Is that something that can be paid for by other funds, or can you apply for competitive grants like the 21st Century Grant? So if you have any questions now, I can take those in the chat, or you can unmute, but thank you for letting me have some time to introduce myself, and please reach out. Thanks, Max.
Pausing for questions or questions in the chat. Okay, we will have Camille's contact information. She provided it there as well. It will be included in the slide deck that will be sent to you at the end here. At this time, speaking of those COVID relief funds, I want to turn the time over to Sarah Harward, who is on our team. She's going to provide some notifications regarding some reporting requirements that are upcoming. Sarah, I'll turn the time over to you.
Thanks, Max. Sarah Harward, everyone. You've probably heard from me if you deal with all of our COVID relief funds. So hope that's not a bad thing. But one of our new things that we've got going is our annual federal reporting requirements. And this is federal reporting, comes from the U.S. Department of Education. They put out a long list of data that they would like to see regarding all of the COVID funds. So we've gone through the data that they're requesting and analyzed what we can provide and what data we need to actually gather from you. So we put that into a Qualtrics survey, and that was sent out to LEA superintendents and directors yesterday. And I sent it out to business administrators and grant leads this morning. So if you're one of those individuals, you probably received an email. And so we're just asking, it is lengthy and we do apologize for that, but it's all just federal requirements. So that survey is available to you, and it needs to be back into us by May 10th. And the reasoning for that deadline is because we have a deadline to get that information into the federal reporting tool that we have to input. So we know it's a tight timeline. We know May, beginning of May, all of May is a busy time for everyone. So if that is an issue, that timeline, please reach out to me and let me know, but please do your best to get your information in via that survey by that date. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to myself or Max or Jessica Kerr, who's also on our team. There you go.
Thank you, Sarah. Does anybody have any questions just relative to the reporting that will be the survey that's forthcoming? Or that has, I guess you sent it out this morning. Okay. Well, we will be available. What we're going to do at this time is I'm going to open it up right now, that if you have any questions that are for the good of the entire group, please ask them. Otherwise, I'm going to give you a little bit of time back. What we are going to do is wrap up this particular meeting. Keep in mind that we are going to send out how to access a recording of this meeting, as well as the slide deck and any other documents or resources that were available here. Just a reminder that in the upcoming week, we are hoping, and I'll ask Tammy and Marilee if they're still on here, if they have any additional comments, we will be sending out to you the calculated preliminary Title I allocations. Again, that'll be next week. We want to just make sure that that's accurate before we send it out. In the interim, let me just say that if there's one thing that has really been consistent over the past 2 years, it's that we've had just consistent changes and challenges. It looks like just moving forward into the forthcoming year, the upcoming year, that stands consistent. We have some challenges to work through. I just want to tell you that, the opportunity as I've had to work with you over these last couple of years and these challenges, I am so honored to have those opportunities to work with you, how you face those challenges on behalf of the safety, the growth and achievement of our students and our school communities. And I just really want to thank you for that, let you know that we are here. It's our purpose to help work through these things in this spring, at the end of this school year, in preparation for next year. We're available. We'll have our contact information. Please reach out to us. And on that note, I will adjourn this meeting and let you know that one thing we planned, and on the agenda, it says that specifically we're going to hold office hours, meaning Sarah, Jessica, and I, but I would invite the USBE team, those who can hang around, to stick around for some office hours to answer any questions that you may have with regards to the forthcoming preliminary allocations, school improvement, call survey, after school programs, summer programs. What else did I miss there? I think that covers it all. So we'll stay on the meeting here to answer any questions, but other than that, we'll call this meeting adjourned and we'll give you back a few minutes of your day. Thank you, folks.